Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to you all, especially those who may be visiting for the first time. I think I see one such person in the congregation. Welcome. And of course, we welcome you all in the precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who is indeed a friend indeed, and a friend in times of need. We want to welcome also those who may be watching via the internet, whether be it on Facebook or on the YouTube. We are glad you could join us. You're not here with us here in person, but you know you're here with us in spirit. And when we watch this message, we trust that you will be blessed by having watched it. If you're watching on YouTube, we just invite you to let's say, like, share, and subscribe. I want to try and build the subscription on that YouTube channel. It's Grace Kudu and JM on YouTube. I want to extend our reach in that regard. And because you're watching on Facebook, you can just like the page as well. Something I'm going to mention that we had heard that some friends were watching from Jeep. We're not friends really, some people are watching from Jeep. We want to welcome them as well and ask that you continue to hold the faith, because you have the faith, and that God is with you at all times. Know that He's with all of us. So it's good to be here, and like I say, it's good that you could join us, and we trust that you would appreciate what is said today. As I begin the message, there are three scriptures, three passages that are circulating in my mind. They have to do with three instances in the life of Jesus Christ during his earthly ministry. The first one is in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 19. You don't need to turn it, you can just take a reference. You can check it later on. I think you all know it. It's where Jesus Christ is beginning his ministry. As you know, Matthew chapter 4, like Luke chapter 4, is about the beginning of Jesus Christ's ministry. Most of you remember it for the temptation of Christ. But that temptation started just after his baptism. So he's baptized early in early Matthew. He is led into the wilderness by the Spirit. He's tempted for 40 days. And then after he leaves the wilderness, it says he goes to Galilee to start what is called the Galilean ministry. And there's a point where he is walking by the sea, I think in Capernaum. It's really the lake of Galilee. And there are two fishermen, Peter and his brother Andrew. And he says to them, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." That's the first passage. The second passage is in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18, where Christ says, where he says in part, you are on Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The point I want to focus on is the fact that he would build his church. And then the third instance is in Matthew 28, verse 19, where it speaks about what we refer to as a Great Commission, where it says, "Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, etc., and teach them to observe the things that I have commanded you." The part I want to focus on where it says, "Go." Now, these three passages, these three instances may seem somewhat unconnected and unrelated. But in a sense, they are related, they are connected. Because even though they deal with ministry of Christ, the ministry of Christ, they touch on something else. Matthew chapter 4, where it talks about where Christ says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men," is at the beginning of his ministry. Matthew 28, where it says, "Go and make disciples," is at the end of his ministry. And in between, somewhere along that spectrum, that timeline, he says, "I will build my church." Now, what's the connection? Well, I really believe that the call of Christ to his disciples, where he says, "Come and follow me," that's where he begins his ministry. And at the end of ministry, he says, "Go and make disciples." So he says, he begins his ministry by calling and saying, "Come." He tells us, by extension, to follow him. And having followed him for a number of years, 3.5 years in the case of the original disciples, he tells them now to go. And I believe that that is all a part or an indication of how the church is to be built. So as we think about building this church, expanding on, increasing our numbers and expanding our reach, we need to keep in mind the fact that God has called us, He's working with us, and He's preparing now to send us to go and to make disciples. So what we're finding then is that as part of the strategy that God seems to have ordained for building His church is one of discipleship. Discipleship. He ends it by saying, go and make disciples. Well, the very interesting word about that word, disciples. In the English Bible, it is two separate words, make and disciples. But I think in the original text, in the original language, Greek, it is not two words, it's just one word. It means teach. But it doesn't mean teach just with the object of imparting knowledge. It means teach with the object of causing the one being taught to learn so well that they can go out and teach. So it's like each one, teach one. So the point I'm making is that as we think about building the church, we need to have in the forefront of our mind this idea, this concept of discipleship. Discipleship. And it has to do with teaching others so that they can teach others. You know, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, again, we won't turn, but you can just check later and take a reference now and consult it later. Paul says something to the effect that the things that you have heard of me, teach faithful, reliable men so that they can teach others. So it's almost like 4 different levels. That Paul was teaching Timothy, Timothy was to teach faithful men, and those faithful men would in turn teach others. So it's teaching, teaching. So discipleship, as most of us know, involves teaching. But it also involves following. So when Paul tells Timothy to teach faithful men so that they can teach, he's talking about discipleship. But when the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, says, follow me as I follow Christ, in the King James Version. Or in the NIV puts it, follow my example as I follow Christ's example. That's discipleship. But what I want us to understand, Bridget, as we go forward from this point, is that discipleship, although it involves teaching, and although it involves following, and most people, when they think of discipleship, they think of someone, a disciple as one who follows Christ. We want to add to that, one who follows Christ, one who learns from Christ in such a way that they can teach others. But there's something else very important about this concept of discipleship that we need to grasp. It's something that the church, Grace Union, is focusing on, something that we want to mention and try to impart at this time. And it is this, that true discipleship is not just about following Christ. It's not just about teaching others to follow Christ. It's about loving as Jesus Christ loved. And then, when all is said and done, that is at the essence of what discipleship is all about. And so, for those of you who like titles, the title for today's message is True Discipleship, Loving as Jesus Loved. The keynote passage is in Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 21. It's a very long passage, a very involved passage. I don't think we can do justice in just one sermon. Indeed, many sermons have been preached on this one section. As a matter of fact, as I was preparing this message, I was consulting some commentators. That section is divided into 2. And we'll see why in a little bit. But the text is, like I said, Romans chapter 2. So I'm going to ask you to turn there, if you have your Bibles with you. Romans chapter 12. And I'm going to begin reading from verse 9. It says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. And if your Bible sound is different, or read a different, it's because I'm reading from the New International Version. You might have a different version. But the spiritual message that God has for us is there included in this, and it's contained in this, and it's for us as well. In verse 10 it says, Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor. Serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope. Patient in affliction. Faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Again, a very long passage, a very involved passage. Very hard to read because it's just a series of commands. So you say 2 words, you stop. You say 3 words, you stop. So, and as I said before, a number of sermons were preached on this. And really, to really get the meaning from this passage, we really need to have like a small group study. And so I'm going to touch on some points, but for the interest of those who have the internet, I could have stayed time to advertise our Tuesday night Bible study on Zoom. So if you have Zoom, you can just take down these numbers. There's the Zoom meeting ID, and I'm on the air and I'm going to international, so they could invite in the world to a Zoom meeting. But if you have a Zoom app on your phone or the Zoom client app on the laptop, you can take this number, 876-852-2578. That's the ID that you need to enter the meeting room. And the password is 876-852. So the ID 876-852-2578. And the password, the first 6 digits, 876-852. We start that Bible study on Tuesdays at 7:30 local time. That's 7:30 EBT. We're not on, no, that's 7:30 EST. We're not on daylight saving time, we're standard time still. So for those in the States, it will be 8:30 New York time, 7:30 Jamaica time. Now I took a little time for advertisement, but that's fine. You know, because of this COVID, things have changed. This is the new normal, and we are our new numbers in the auditorium are kind of small, in the hall are small. So a lot of people are choosing to watch by it. So one of those invite those people to join us, not just for services to do, but for the Bible study as well. But I want to look at the Bible study, look at this passage more in the Bible study on Tuesday, so you can tune in that time. But we're here, and I want to just touch now on trying to get the gist, the essence of what the Apostle Paul is telling us in this passage in Romans chapter 12. It's all about loving as Jesus Christ loved. Before we get to this passage, though, I want us to look at 2 other passages. I want us to turn to Matthew, what is called the, where should I? Okay, let's go to Matthew 22. Matthew 22 is, we looked at the Great Commission a little bit in Matthew 28, that's the Great Commission. In Matthew 22, we read about what is referred to as the Great Commandment. And so it says in Matthew 22, verse 34, it says, here that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. And one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he says all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second great commandment, we could call it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. So what's the great commandment? The great commandment, brethren, is to love God, but also now to love your neighbor. How? As you love yourself. With that in mind, I want to turn to John chapter 13. John chapter 13. I want to read 2 verses here. Because this is what Jesus Christ is speaking, and it's on the topic of love. But notice what he says in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. Well, the thought really starts in verse 31, so let's just read from verse 31. It says, when he was gone, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Alright? I want to stop there. Now why am I pointing to this? Well, we saw what Jesus Christ said earlier in the passage cited for us in Matthew 22, where it says, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the second great commandment. What we're reading about here in John chapter 13 is about a new commandment. So the great commandment says what? Love your neighbor as yourself. The new commandment says what? Love one another as I have loved you. So the command is clear, that we are to love others. And I remember what the point of this sermon is all about. It's all about the love of Christ and us reflecting that love and loving others as Christ, because that's the heart of true discipleship. And so he touches on that now. He says, well, he didn't say it, but sometime previous to this, because this is the night before he died, he had told them that the second great commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now he's telling them to love one another as I have loved you. So here's the point. The key, the operative word they will say is to love. You must love. Who must you love? Very interesting. In the first instance, he says love your neighbor. In this instance, he says what? Love one another. We're going to come back to that in a bit. What does he say also? In the first instance, the great commandment, or the second great commandment, he says what? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Here he says what? Love one another as I have loved you. So if you've been listening and following, you know that there's a little bit of a difference, right? In one case, the first case, the great commandment, the second great commandment, the command is to love your neighbor. In the new command, the command is to love one another. In the first command, second great command, the command is to what? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. In the new command is to love one another as I have loved you. So what we're saying, I mean, I've talked about this before, is that we have a responsibility to love. As Christians, we love everybody. But it seems there's a difference in the way God expects us to love each other as opposed to the way we love the world. And we'll see it as we go through the book of Romans. You know, when I was in college, Mr. Armstrong sometimes addressed us and he said to us like, my job is to focus on the trunk of the tree. And I leave it to the evangelists and the pastors, etc., to focus on the branches and the twigs and the leaves. So he tell us the main point, that whatever the main point at that time was. Why were you born, or the incredible potential, or whatever was on his mind. But he leave it to the pastors, the evangelists, etc., to kind of fill in the blanks. But I kind of see Apostle Paul like that. That Jesus focuses on the trunk of the tree, and Apostle Paul comes later on in his letters, in his epistles, and he fills out the branches and the twigs and tells us. So in a sense, the Apostle Paul's writings help us understand Christ's teachings. So when we look at this now, what we're seeing is he has given us a general command that we must love. We must love our neighbor, but we must also love one another. What we're going to see when we go to Romans chapter 12 is that Paul fleshes that out. What do you mean to love one another? How does a Christian love one another? How does a Christian love others who are not in the church but in the world? And so we get to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, like I said, the book of Romans is an incredible book, as you have heard me say before, and I hope you believe that by now. In verse 9, he begins our passage for today by saying, love must be sincere. In verse 13 of the same Romans chapter 12, he ends that section by saying, share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. So that's the point I wanted to get. This passage, our text for today, is from Romans chapter 12, verse 9, right to the end of chapter verse 21. But these first few verses, from verse 9 to verse 13, could be considered as how to love Christians. How to love, as Christ put it, how to love one another. They deal with that part of a new command. So that verses 9 through 12 is to 13, is about loving the church, loving other Christians. Look what it says in verse 13. Share with God's people who are in need. So the point that it says God's people gives an indication that he's not talking about everybody in the same light, he doesn't put everybody in the same basket with who are in need. But notice the next verse, verse 14, it says, bless those who persecute you. Now, don't expect persons in the church to persecute us, although sometimes bad mind creeps in and that kind of thing can happen. But what we're seeing now is that the focus has kind of shifted in what Paul is saying now. And some commentators believe now that this section from verse 14 up to verse 21 is how we should, as Christians, love those in the world. So the passage is 9 to 21. The first few verses, how to love brothers, and the second part, how to love the people in the world. Now, again, as I was going through this, there are about 22 different commands in this one section. So we don't have time to go through all 21 or all 22 here. But I want to touch on some points, and the ones that talk about love. Because what Paul is doing here, as I understand it, is that he's fleshing out. He's kind of putting the meat on the bone to what Jesus Christ said. Jesus Christ said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love one another as I have loved you. So he's now telling us now, Paul is telling us what it means to love one another, what it means to love neighbor as a Christian. So he says, the first thing he tells us in verse 9 is love must be sincere. Love must be sincere. What does that mean? It means love must be real. Love must be without pretense. There are some people who will tell you that they love you, but by their actions, they prove the opposite. They show that they really don't love you. I mean, they're just telling you what you want to hear, right? What Paul is saying here, that as Christians, our love must be sincere. Well, perhaps the best thing I could do right now to save some time is to maybe look at some passages, how this is translated in other translations. One of the translations in the Fast Current, one of my favorites, is the New Living Translation. It used to be the Living Bible, which was really not a translation but a paraphrase. But apparently as they were deciding to upgrade it, they got so caught up that they decided to make it a translation. So it's now the New Living Translation. But it's very modern language. And so sometimes you have difficulty understanding the King James Version or the New King James Version because of its worded. If you can get a copy of the New Living Translation, that's a good one to take note of. This thing is not just working, but anyway, we'll come back to that. But it says love must be sincere. So in terms of dealing with each other, brethren, one of the first things on Paul's mind is that we must be sincere, must be genuine. That if you say we love somebody, we must really mean it, or we must act accordingly. He says, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Now that may sound, or some would say, easier said than done. Because as much as we say, or we tell ourselves, or we tell others, that we really hate evil, it is not really the evil that we hate. In another case, it is the consequences of evil. And so we don't do the evil thing, not because we hate the evil thing, but because we hate what the evil thing might cause. You understand? So a man doesn't hate the fact that stealing is wrong. He hates the fact that if he steals, he might get caught. You understand? A man who lusts at a woman, it's not so much that he hates the lusting at the woman, but he hates what might happen if he is caught or if he goes on. So what Paul is saying, brethren, as Christians, in dealing with each other, we need to move beyond that. We must try to get to the point where we don't just hate the consequences of the thing. We hate the thing if it is bad. So we hold fast to that which is good. We cling to that which is good. And we hate what is evil. He says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Again, he's making a command now that is to the church members. Because he wouldn't expect us as Christians to love people outside in the world who are not our brothers with the same kind of brotherly love that he expects us to love each other with. So again, this is that love that he's talking about. Because he's talking about brother. I think the word here in the Greek is what they call philostarge. It's a compound word that is from philos or philia and starge. It's talking about a family love, the kind of love that a father would have for his children, or a brother might have for a sibling or a sister or a brother. It's someone, that's the kind of love he wants in the church. You know, the thing about the English language, it is so very limited when compared to the Greek. You know, in the English language, for example, if a man loves football, or if he loves to go to the track, or he loves red wine, or he loves music, or he loves rice and peas, or in my case, stewed peas, it's the same word love. So when somebody says, a woman says to her husband, for example, honey, do you love me? You have to think, well, do I love her like I love stewed peas, or do I love her like I love football? Right? In the Greek, it's a bit different. There's a word for brotherly love, which is like philia, or philos, right? There's a word for erotic love, like a man for a woman, which is eros, which is the word erotica. And of course, there's the spiritual love, where we love brothers and sisters because we have the same spirit in us, which is agape. And the Greek language is like that. It's more specific, it's more precise. So we need to understand that. So God wants us to love, brethren, with that kind of a genuine, sincere love for one another. That our love should not be feigned, it should not be put on, it should not be pretended. He says, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking. Again, honor one another is again putting the other person first. You know, that's what Christian love is all about. That you esteem, as another pastor put it, you esteem others as better than yourself. You understand? Somebody would say, for example, that in a marriage, it's supposed to be 50-50. And I was watching something with Steve Harvey that they were saying, no, it's not 50-50. So the person said, what, 60-40? He said, no, not 60-40. He said, it is 85-15. And he says the woman is worth 85% and the man must get 15. And one thing he says, for example, is that she needs so much more disposable income. She is worth so much because she's the one that can produce babies, etc. So man will challenge well, then she can't lift up my head. But then she's the one that carries me for 9 months. What his point basically was this, and we don't know after we will, that she contributes more. You know, and so he was saying that. But I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking that really, it really should be 50-50, or 60-40, or 80-20. It really should be 100. That each of us give 100%. You know, there's a John Legend song that says, all of me loves all of you. 100%. If we go into a relationship, brethren, and we're only going to give 50%, then we're courting disaster. We should go into this thing wholehearted, prepared to give the full 100. And brethren, you know, a lot of people come to church and they leave empty. And so, boy, I remember coming, I get, now what next week, etc. So why? Because they came to get, they didn't come to give. But when you come to church because you want to share a testimony or share a song or share some offering or whatever, you tend to get more out of the service because you have come to give. You understand? Now, if everybody comes to give, other people must get. But if everybody comes only to get and not to give, then nobody gets anything. That's what I'm saying. We're going to this. So, we're talking about love, genuine, sincere love. It's a love where you go into this thing with the eyes wide open, knowing that you're going to see some words, some bad breath to deal with, etc., etc. But you're committed. And you're listening for the long run, you're going to give 100, full 100. Not 50-50, not 60-40, not even 85-50. Everybody go 100%. So, that is the kind of love that he has in mind. Skipping down, we're going to skip later. On Bible study, on children, we can go into some more details, some of these things. But in the interest of time, let's go to verse 13. It says, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Now, a lot of these verses have different commands. But when you look at it and you analyze, when you look at it and meditate on them, you see that some of them are really tied together. Like when I saw up at the front, for example, it says, love must be sincere. Right? Right on it says, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. If you will not do anything that is bad for that person. So here it says now, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. He touches on two aspects of Christian living. I would say Christian liberty. What the Christian should do, how the Christian shows love. One is in the area of need. Now that could be, it seems, material need. It could be financial need. It could be a physical need. Like somebody's building a house and they want some block or some steel. And you can help that person. Paul says, share with that person. The other one is hospitality. Hospitality. You know, I think it's Barclay in one of his commentaries said that Christianity is about the open book, the open heart, and the open door. That as Christians, you really kind of are open, not just to any and everybody, because you have to be wise as servants and all that, but in terms of Christian brethren, you need to have that hospitable spirit. You know, the qualification, I think, for elders or deacons is that they must be active teachers, etc., but they must be hospitable as well. Right? And I've had the privilege of knowing some people, a lot of people like that over the years. So the two things he wants us to focus on is being willing to share with others in the church and being hospitable. You know, back in the day, they didn't have Sheraton or Marriott or Hilton or those big hotels. So if you're going to visit, to leave one church area to visit another church area, you couldn't say, make a booking at some hotel and stay there. No, you'd have to contact a brethren and see who you could stay there. You stay with a brethren. So it's like us, or some of you maybe who have gone to conventions abroad. You can just book your airline ticket, you call it the hotel, and make a reservation hotel, you stay at the hotel. But back in the day, it wasn't like that. Back in the day, what you'd have to do, you have to try and find some brethren in the area where the convention is, and so can I come and stay by you? Right? And that person would have to be prepared now to help in that regard. So the point is, hospitality is one of the ways that as Christians we show up. But perhaps the other one that is perhaps more common, because not everybody want to come and stay by us. But we have perhaps know more people who need a help out, a little financial help out, or a borrows, or a little small, or something physical, something tangible to tie them over to the next paycheck. We know more people like that than people who want to come and stay by us. And so he says, sure God's people who are in need. You know, I'm not one who likes to open up and talk about myself. You know that I'm not one to do that. Well, I want to share something. As you know, in June 2018, over 2 years now, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. That's what you might know. And that was the bad news. The good news was that it was stage 1, grade 1. Meaning, grade 1 meaning that we were called 3+3 recent score, meaning that the cancer did not seem to be very aggressive. And in terms of staging, stage 1, meaning it was still contained within the prostate. Now, doctors love to hear that. Because when the doctor said the cancer is in the prostate, it means the cancer has not spread outside the prostate to any bones or any lymph nodes or anything like that. And so the first thing we want to do is before they can say what may have caused the cancer in the first place, is how they can get out this man's prostate. So that's the first thing I wanted. Either radical surgery, prostatectomy, or radiation treatment, or hormone treatment. So I opted to have none of those. I believe, because it was so early in the day, it was stage 1, grade 1, that it gave me some time to try and come up with some natural therapy. So I opted not to have any surgery, not to have radiation, not to have the hormone treatment or any chemotherapy or anything like that, but to try and deal with it by food and healthy living and healthy lifestyle. But supplemental to that was my desire to have regular scans. And not just ultrasound, because if you've ever seen an ultrasound of a baby, all they can know is that a baby is there. You don't know something what kind of baby, just because everything's kind of blurred and so on. If you do a CAT scan, then you get a little more clarity, a little more definition. If you do an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, you get an even clearer picture. Very good for the car, looking at soft tissue. So my plan was to get like an MRI every 6 weeks to see how this cancer was growing or progressing, if it was still indeed contained within the prostate that spread outside the prostate. And maybe in the interim, to have some cheaper scan, where ultrasound or maybe a CAT scan or so. But, Bridget, I will tell you that I was limited by the cost. Because one of these things can be very expensive. I think right now, an MRI of just the pelvic, from navel to just below the genitals is, I think, 40,000. To the abdomen and pelvis is 80,000. So I was limited by the money. And I'm mentioning all this because this was an integral part of my strategy to find out if the thing was spreading. And if it was indeed spreading, then maybe I would decide to go and have the surgery. But there was no way of telling because I didn't like that. Sometimes I come up with 20,000 or 25,000, but then something is coming out to spend it, so I drop it down to 10 or so. So that's how I get up to 25, 30, 35. But I just couldn't, for some reason, reach the 41 where it was. Now, like I said, this is from 28. I started attending in this church, coming back to this church in September. I decided to come back full time, September 2019, almost a year and some later. And I remember sharing, I mentioned to a few people here. And somebody who heard, ever since that, I've always been checking her. Every time she sees me, she wants to know, well, how are you, or what's the situation, etc. I said, I'm fine, I'm good. But I know she, in the back of her mind, she wants to know, how is the state of the prostate? And I would say voluntarily, well, you know, I'm fine, I think I'm fine, I just really don't know, I want to do a scan. I just mentioned it kind of casually. Well, a few days later, she called me and she said, you said something about scan. How much does the scan cost? And I mentioned the cost for the pelvic and the pelvic plus the abdomen, just in case it was spread. And the person said, all right, I think at the hour to after that, she said, I'll just arrange for you to get $40,000. Right? And I'm going to say that this bank credit should bring her account to by Monday. This was on Friday, she told me. I mention that because the last scan I did, I just checked it this morning, was in November 2018. And my plan to get a scan in 6 months, and I will not be able to get it until just now, almost 2 years later. But I mentioned it to Bridget because I know that God can provide. And I mentioned it because sometimes, as Christians, the thing about this is that it causes you to be vulnerable. To tell somebody that you are in need is to expose yourself. It's expose your own shortcomings. That's what I'm saying. To be hospitable to somebody, to open your house, is to expose all your private parts. Not the private parts, your privacy. Scratch that. Can we delete that from me? Well, I'll say your privacy. Because they're going to go into your bathroom and say your bathroom is safe if the shower curtain is dirty, if you have scum around the toilet and all this kind of thing. And, you know, they go in the kitchen and say, oh, the stove look and the bedroom, and you're exposing yourself to that. When somebody comes into your house, when you tell somebody, boy, I have a financial need, it can't stick you, to tell you the truth. Now, if it's just have 50 that you want or 100 that you want, it's not a big problem. But if you want 20,000 or 30, it's not a problem. So I'm saying you make yourself vulnerable. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. God has provided a church, right, to support you, to support us. And he has equipped various members in the church with various gifts, including the gifts of giving. The truth of the matter, though, Bridget, is this. You will never know sometimes what gift a person has unless the need for that gift arises. So sometimes you can have the greatest need, but nobody knows. And the person who has the gift that God has given to help you with the gift of giving, the gift of encouragement, whatever, cannot help you because you have not made yourself vulnerable. And I'm saying that because I don't know who's listening. I always might be hearing, but I want to say this, that if you're a need and you're in the church, don't be afraid to let others know. Because that's why you're a part of the church. God didn't expect you to save the world by yourself. Right? And that's why God didn't give all the gifts to one individual. He gave his gifts, as God was saying, he distributed it among brethren as it pleased him for the common good, to force us to work together. So no one person has all the gifts. One person might have 2 gifts or more, but no one person has all the gifts. And sometimes for that gift to become manifest, that's why a lot of people are gifted, you know. But some people just don't know the gift because the need for that gift has not arisen. And that's why a lot of people push this about small groups and cell groups. Because in small groups, we have 12 persons or less who meet on a regular basis and pray together, who share a meal together, who exchange ideas, who exchange secrets about the confidentiality. People are more prone to let their needs become more known. And because the needs become more known in a small group, the gifts become more manifest. Because in that small group is someone with a gift to address that need. So if there's nothing to take from this, understand that God's church is a group of people who are trying to love as Jesus Christ does. And if you have a need, there is somebody or some bodies in that need that can help you to address that need. That's my lesson from this whole thing. There's a part 2 to this story that I want to tell you another time. Of how God was really blessed in that way. Fantastic. But like I said, it all began. And this is something that I was just listening to I'm talking about. Enjoy this blessing. It would not have happened if this person that I'm telling you about had not shown love in that way by giving me that money. Because if by giving me that, I put me in another situation that caused God to bless in another way. And it's amazing how like the domino effect, like one good turn deserves another, and one thing leads to another. And I'm just, as I go back and I chase my steps back, if I had not shared right here that I had that need, that I had that problem, that person not going to move to help, that person not moves to help, the other person not going to move to help. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes it starts with just being willing to be open to the vulnerable, and to let others know. And God has surrounded us with people who love us. It may not always seem like that, because we all have our problems, we all have our crosses carrying. But when the chips are down, it's when the going gets tough get going. Time is against us, but like I said, I just want to invite you to the Bible says God, we have a chance to touch on how God wants us to love the church, love the outside. We look about this kind about loving the church member. But you can just read what is there, meditate on it, and hopefully get to that benefit. So to conclude, I want to go back to John chapter. I want to leave Romans and continue with John chapter 13. And just read those 2 verses again. In verse 34 and verse 35. It says in verse 34, "A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." And it says in verse 35, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples." How do you know that you are a disciple of Christ? Not because you can speak in tongues, right? Not because you have a good job, and because you have been blessed. Not because you can give big offerings. Not because you attend church every Saturday or every Sunday. No. They will know that you are his disciples because you have love one for another. At the end of the day, true discipleship is displayed by how we love one another. And I think Christ wants us to not just love one another as we love ourselves, but to love one another in some cases sacrificially, because that's the way he loved us. And the command is for us as true disciples of Christ to get to that point where we can start to love each other as Christ loved us. So can we pray? Our Father in heaven, Almighty God, we thank you so much, Father, for the love that you have for us. I know we cannot begin to really grasp, because we're sometimes so limited by our own fears, our own inadequacies. But Father, the more we get to know you, the more we get to love you, because indeed it is true when they say to know you is to love you. To know you, Father God, is to love you more. We thank you, God, for the many ways that you show your love for us, and for the people that you show us love through. Because in many times you bless us not directly, but indirectly through others. So we pray to God that as we continue to move forward, help us to be mindful of the others that are working with us, that are moving with us. Help us to be patient with them. Help us to be encouraging. Help us to be kind. Help us to be tolerant. Help us to be loving. Help us to love each other as you have loved us. So Father, I just want to thank you as we come to the end of this message for all that you have done, all that you are doing, and all that you continue to do, and that you will do. We ask your dismissal now and pray for your continued guidance and blessing and your help. In Jesus Christ's name.